The Mekong Delta does not care about courage. It does not care about training or firepower, or the American certainty that superior technology conquers all terrain. At 0200 on a moonless July night in 1969, the Delta existed as something ancient and indifferent. Black water merging with black sky, the jungle breathing on both sides of the canal like something coiled and waiting. The air carried diesel and rot, and something else drifting from upstream that none of the four men moving through the darkness wanted to name. The Delta had swallowed armies for 1,000 years. It drew no distinction between invaders and liberators. It simply took. Petty Officer First Class Michael Donovan. Ghost to every man who had served beside him in SEAL Team 2, Detachment Delta, moved through that water without sound. 24 years old, from the salt-flat streets of Norfolk, Virginia, he had spent 2 years training to become what the canal demanded. Something that passed through without leaving a trace. He carried a CAR-15 taped for silence, a K-bar strapped to his thigh, and sealed inside his breast pocket, pressed flat against his sternum, a waterproof photograph, his younger sister at her high school graduation, grinning with no idea where her brother was or what he did after dark. He hadn't told her. He hadn't told anyone. The smell drifting from upstream, the thing none of them could name, would make complete sense before dawn. He didn't know that yet. Neither did the three men moving silently behind him. But something had already happened in the black water ahead that would change the shape of this mission in ways no briefing had anticipated. If you're watching this, you understand something most history books never address. The men who ran operations in the Mekong Delta in 1969 rarely made headlines. Their missions were classified. Their losses were invisible by design. This channel exists to change that, to tell these stories with the honesty and respect they deserve, without glorifying the wars that put young men in black water at 2 in the morning. Subscribe now and join those who believe military history belongs to the men who lived it, not the politicians who managed it from a safe distance. Their courage was real. Their stories deserve to survive.
Michael Donovan had not enlisted because he believed in the war. In the autumn of 1966, 21 years old and without a clear story for his own life, he had enlisted because service was the only narrative his family knew how to tell. His father, a retired Navy machinist with a laugh like a foghorn and hands that were never entirely clean, had raised him in a house where joining up was not a decision so much as a next sentence in a paragraph already written. When the draft notice arrived for his neighbor Tommy, a 19-year-old who played guitar and wanted to study marine biology, Michael drove him to the induction office and came home with his own enlistment papers signed. He told himself it was the right thing to do. In the years that followed, he would feel less certain about that. What he had not expected was to discover something he was frightening good at. SEAL selection at Coronado broke men in systematic waves. Donovan watched candidates quit during Hell Week, watched instructors drag them from the surf, watched men ring the bell and walk away with something permanently changed in their eyes. He did not quit, not because he was the fastest or strongest candidate in his class. He did not quit because he possessed what his lead instructor called, with something close to professional respect, a specific kind of patience. He could wait in cold water, in darkness, under fire, or about to be, in ways that seemed to require no effort at all. While other men fought their fear, Donovan sat with his the way you sit with weather. The unit called him Ghost before the nickname was ever official, almost as a reflex, and it fit him completely. Vietnam confirmed it at a cost he had not fully calculated when he arrived. By July of '69, Donovan had been in country for 8 months and had run 17 confirmed operations in the Delta. Each was a variation on the same compressed truth. Move in dark, stay quiet. Reach the objective, come home. He had made it back to the forward operating base before dawn 17 times. But the math of 8 months in the Delta does not remain clean. Petty Officer Dennis Farrell, 26, from Akron, Ohio, who had a daughter he had never held, had been killed during a compromised extraction in April. Gunner's mate Ray Tolliver, 30, from Memphis, whose letters home were always funny right up until the last one, had died when a booby-trapped canal bank detonated beneath him in June. Their absence moved with Donovan the way a wound moves, not visible, present every moment. The waterproof photograph pressed flat against his sternum was partly about his sister, and partly about staying tethered to a world where people existed without knowing precisely how close to death they lived each day. By mid-1969, the Mekong Delta was the most tactically complex theater of the Vietnam War. The Delta, a vast, low-lying expanse of canals, rice paddies, mangrove swamps, and isolated hamlets covering the southernmost quarter of South Vietnam, functioned as the circulatory system of the Viet Cong's southern operation. Along nearly 2,000 miles of interconnected waterways moved weapons caches, political cadres, supply coordinators, and the logistical architecture that kept the insurgency alive, not through conventional force, but through deep roots inside the civilian population itself. You could not bomb a canal network into submission. You could not defoliate an idea. The American and South Vietnamese response was the Phoenix program, a combined intelligence and direct action effort targeting the Viet Cong infrastructure, the VCI, the political and administrative apparatus that gave the guerrilla movement its endurance. Phoenix disrupted supply lines, neutralized regional commanders, and forced the VCI into smaller, more isolated cells. It was also a program that operated in a moral gray area wide enough that many of the men who executed its operations never fully reconciled what they had done. Most of them never spoke about it publicly. That silence is itself a kind of answer. Donovan's mission fell within the Phoenix framework. 3 weeks of combined SEAL and Provincial Reconnaissance Unit intelligence had identified a mid-level VCI logistics coordinator managing supply movement through a canal network in Kien Hoa Province. The objective: capture him alive for interrogation if the situation allowed, neutralize him if it did not. 45 minutes in and out. Standing waist-deep in that canal at 0200, with the unnamed smell drifting past him in the dark, Donovan had made a quiet promise to the 3 men behind him, not in writing, not to his commanding officer, but the kind men make when they understand that carrying the alternative is too heavy. He was not going to lose anyone tonight. All 4 of them were coming back. He would remember making that promise for the rest of his life. Stories like Michael Donovan's do not survive in official records. They survive because someone passes them down, in kitchens, in bar rooms, in letters written long after the war ended and the silences became permanent. If you served in the Delta, or knew someone who did, if you have heard a version of this kind of mission told in fragments by a man who could never quite bring himself to say the whole thing, the comment section below is not just a place to type. It is where these memories live on. Add yours. These men deserve to be remembered by name. Nguyen Van Than was 31 years old, and he had been at war for 11 years. He had joined the National Liberation Front in 1958, not from abstract ideology, but from something more concrete and personal. He had watched French soldiers burn his uncle's house when he was 13 years old, and the understanding that formed in him in that moment had never required revision. He had a wife named Lin, who taught primary school in a village north of Can Tho, and 2 sons, Min, who was 6, and Quoc, who was 4. On the nights when operations permitted, he wrote them letters that began with the same sentence: "Your father thinks of you every moment." He was not a man given to cruelty. He was a man who had made a decision about the world at age 13 and had never been given sufficient reason to unmake it. By 1969, Than had risen to genuine tactical importance within the Kien Hoa Province VCI structure. He managed the movement of supplies and personnel through a network of 5 canal routes, coordinating resupply for 3 active VC cells, fielding nearly 80 fighters. He accomplished this with minimal resources, under constant pressure from American and South Vietnamese intelligence operations, using a system of trusted couriers, pre-positioned caches, and rapid safehouse rotation that made his network extraordinarily difficult to map. MACV-SOG analysts had tracked him for months. 2 previous operations to capture or neutralize him had failed. One through compromised intelligence, one because he had relocated 24 hours before the extraction element arrived. He was not lucky. He was disciplined. Than had learned to respect the Americans without underestimating them. Their equipment and their training were real. Their SEAL teams operated in darkness with a competence that most armies in the world could not have replicated. What he had learned to rely on, however, was the Delta itself. The waterways, the villages, the canal networks, they belonged to people whose families had worked that land for generations. An American SEAL team, however skilled, moved through that landscape as a foreign organism. It could strike, it could not remain. That asymmetry, Than believed, was the entire war expressed in miniature. That night, he had gone to sleep at 2200 hours at the Rat Jiang position that had served as his operational base for 2 weeks. He had posted his 4 guards on rotation, confirmed the next supply movement 3 days out, read 2 pages of a Vietnamese translation of Alexandre Dumas, and thought about his sons before sleeping. He had no reason to expect what was moving through the black water toward him. On the American side, the stakes carried their own specific weight. The Phoenix program's effectiveness in the Delta was measurable and real, but it existed within a broader strategic context that made tactical success feel at times like movement on a treadmill. The Viet Cong's southern infrastructure had survived years of American direct action. For every logistics coordinator removed from the board, the VCI adapted, reassigning functions, rebuilding courier networks, filling positions from an organizational depth that American planners consistently underestimated. General Creighton Abrams had shifted American strategy from body counts toward pacification and Vietnamization, but the transition was incomplete and contested, and the men executing operations in the Delta operated within that institutional ambiguity every night. They were fighting a war whose strategic objectives had never been cleanly defined, using precise tactical tools against a diffuse, adaptive enemy in terrain that negated most of their conventional advantages. For Donovan and the element behind him, those macro-strategic considerations were abstract. What was concrete was the mission: reach the structure, secure the target, extract alive if possible. What was equally concrete was the additional calculation that no briefing covered. Every time a 4-man SEAL element entered the Delta at 0200 and closed on a defended position, the probability of coming out intact was not guaranteed by skill alone. Skill was the floor, the ceiling was whatever the night decided to offer. The intelligence package said 12 VC, 4 on watch. The element was authorized. 45 minutes. If the intelligence was wrong, if the target had moved, if the force strength had changed, if something had happened in that canal sector that no asset had reported, Donovan's 4 men would find out the way operators in the Delta always found out. In the dark, under fire, with no margin for revision. Something had happened in that canal sector. No asset had reported it. If you're still watching, you already understand something most people miss. Military history isn't about glorifying war. It's about honoring the people who were sent to fight them. Subscribe now and join those who refuse to let these stories become footnotes. And hit that like button. It tells YouTube that these stories deserve to reach the people who need to hear them. They had been in the water for 22 minutes when Donovan raised his left fist and the element froze. Touch came first. He felt it through the water, a vibration below the threshold of sound, the kind of low-frequency pressure that a body partially submerged registers before the ear can process it. His feet, planted in soft canal mud 3 feet below the surface, told him that something was moving on the bank to his left. Not an animal. The rhythm was wrong for an animal. Too irregular, too self-conscious, with the specific halting quality of men trying and partially failing to be quiet. His right hand found the pistol grip of the Car-15. His thumb found the selector without looking. He had done it so many times that the motion lived below thought. Sound followed. A cough, half suppressed, absorbed into a sleeve, from the bank no more than 15 meters ahead. Then a murmur, low and quick, 2 syllables in Vietnamese that Donovan's partial working knowledge resolved as a name or a number. Then the scrape of a rifle stock against what was probably bamboo. 3 men on the bank, maybe 4. Their attention directed inland, not at the water. Not yet. Vision came slowly, the way it always did in the Delta at that hour. As his eyes reconstructed shape from shadow, the canal-side structure materialized from the darkness, a low building on stilts over the water, thatched roof, 2 shuttered windows showing no light. 30 meters. A figure moved along the near wall of the structure, and Donovan tracked it with the Car-15, and then a second figure appeared from the far end, and then a third emerged from the shadows between the building and the canal bank, and he understood with the quiet, instantaneous certainty of a man who has run this equation many times that the intelligence estimate of 12 men was not 12 men. Smell arrived as confirmation of everything he had been refusing to name for the past 22 minutes. The thing drifting from upstream was the smell of a man who had been dead for at least 18 hours, decomposing in the warm water of a July night at a pace that the Delta accelerated with indifference. Someone had come through this canal before them. Someone had not come back. And the men on that bank, the additional men that no package had accounted for, knew a body had been in the water. They had been waiting in the elevated alertness that discovery of a dead comrade produces for whatever had killed him to come back. Taste was lust, and it was what it always was, metal and adrenaline, the thin copper coating that the body laid across the back of the throat, like a biological warning that the body was already ahead of the mind. He had tasted it 17 times. He had learned not to fight it. He swallowed it, let it become fuel, and gave the hand signal for advance. In the structure, Nguyen Van Than had come awake 40 seconds earlier. Not from sound, from the absence of it. The frogs along the canal bank had gone quiet, and in 4 years of operating out of canal positions in the Delta, Than had learned to trust the frogs over the guards. He was on his feet and moving toward the doorway, AK-47 in hand, before the nearest guard outside had processed anything wrong. He said one word to the courier sleeping in the corner, "Go." The courier moved without question. That was the arrangement. Than did not run. Running was the wrong response tactically, and the wrong response for a man who had spent 11 years deciding what kind of fighter he was. He moved to the rear window and assessed angles of approach, guard positions, likely force size. The Americans, he assumed Americans, were in the water. Small element, night operation. The pattern meant SEALs. He had read the VCI network reports on SEAL contact patterns. The phrase that had stayed with him was, "They do not stop advancing." He believed it now. He issued 3 hand signals through the darkness and began moving toward the rear of the structure, away from the canal, buying distance and time. His guards were good men. He intended to see them again. On the bank, the first guard, a man named Trin, 19 years old, 3 months with this element, from a village near the Cambodian border, heard or felt something in the water and did the completely human, tactically incorrect thing. He shouted 2 words into the darkness. Then the canal bank erupted. Whiting took Trin's position with 2 suppressed rounds before the second shout had finished forming. Reyes swung the stoner toward the structure and held for a confirmed target, his grandmother's name on the receiver catching no light. Lowe moved right, staying in the water, managing the angle to the building's far end. Donovan came up onto the bank in a single motion and ran a count in his head. Doorway, left window, far corner, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the building, the additional element whose size he still could not fix. 3 minutes into contact, Whiting had taken a through-and-through round in the upper left arm, missed the bone, bleeding hard but not critical. Lowe had it packed and wrapped in 80 seconds. 3 VC fighters were down on the bank. The structure ahead showed no light and no movement at the windows. And the primary target, Nguyen Van Tan, was either inside or had already exited through the rear. The intelligence had been wrong by 9 men. The provincial reconnaissance unit had run an operation through this canal sector 2 nights prior. One of their scouts had activated a VC early warning device, a tripwire and a grenade, in the water 40 meters upstream. His body had drifted. Nothing had been filed because not everything in the Phoenix bureaucracy was filed. The VC at this compound had found him the previous morning. They had been on heightened alert for 18 hours before Donovan's element arrived, waiting for a follow-up that they had correctly predicted would come. The Delta had been trying to tell him for 22 minutes. The smell, the silence, the vibration in the mud, all of it had been the water's version of a warning. He understood it now. The problem was that understanding it did not change the compound in front of him, the 9 additional fighters in the darkness, or the target who was no longer where the intelligence had placed him. But that was only the beginning. They found Nguyen Van Than in the darkness behind the structure, alone, 30 meters from the rear wall, moving toward the tree line at a pace that was disciplined but not fast enough. Donovan had him at gunpoint before Than reached the first stand of mangroves. The moment had the compressed, slightly unreal quality that follows combat. The shooting had stopped, the night had resettled into its ambient noise, frogs returning, water moving, and the 2 men stood facing each other in the darkness with nothing between them but a Car-15 and a decision that would take longer than this night to finish making. Than raised his hands without being told. He had calculated the angles and found that he had run out of them. He did not look afraid. He looked like a man doing arithmetic. Reyes secured the prisoner. Lowe checked Whiting's arm and gave a thumbs up. He'd make it out. Donovan counted heads. 4 Americans, 1 prisoner, 6 confirmed VC fighters neutralized. At least 3 additional unaccounted for in the surrounding darkness. The clock read 37 minutes since water entry. They had 8 minutes of buffer before the extraction window closed. For approximately 90 seconds, something almost like relief moved through the element. The mission was intact. The target was secured. All 4 of them were still breathing. Whiting managed a half laugh about the arm, and Reyes said something in Spanish that was probably not a prayer, and Lowe, with the specific humor of combat medics, told Whiting his sleeve was ruined. The photograph against Donovan's sternum was damp with canal water and sweat. His sister's grin, sealed behind plastic, survived intact. For 90 seconds, the math appeared to be working. Then Donovan looked at the prisoner and at the intelligence package folded in his left cargo pocket and understood the shape of what was in front of him. The Phoenix Protocol was specific. Confirmed VCI personnel captured during direct action operations were to be transferred to Provincial Reconnaissance Unit handlers for processing. Processing was a bureaucratic word. Donovan had been in country long enough, had spoken with enough PRU advisors, had heard enough things in enough forward operating bases to understand precisely what processing meant for a mid-level VCI coordinator like Nguyen Van Tan. The information Tan carried, route maps, courier schedules, cell contact protocols, was exactly the kind of intelligence that PRU handlers had methods for extracting, methods that were not in any official manual, methods that no American officer was required to witness. The protocol was the protocol. It had produced results. The Phoenix program had disrupted the Kien Hoa VCI structure in measurable, documented ways. Men had been saved. American men, South Vietnamese soldiers, civilians who might have been in the path of VC operations that never happened because the intelligence extracted from captured personnel had shut them down. The logic was not nothing. The logic was real. What would you do? Not in theory, not in a classroom, not with time to read the legal briefings and consult the ethics panels and call someone with authority above your own. Right now, 32 years old, in the dark, canal water drying in your fatigues, a prisoner in zip ties in front of you who has 2 sons he writes letters to, and who managed a logistics network that moved weapons to fighters who killed Americans. Your extraction window is closing. Your man is wounded. 3 unaccounted fighters are somewhere in the dark around you. You follow the protocol, and Nguyen Van Tan goes to the PRU handlers, and the intelligence he carries gets extracted by methods you will never be asked to confirm or deny. And maybe, probably, American lives are saved by what he tells them. That is not a small thing. You follow the protocol, and you can look at the 4 of you walking back to the base before dawn and know you kept the promise you made in the canal. Or you acknowledge what the protocol requires and carry that too, because the promise you made was about the 4 of them coming home. You made no promise about what happened to the man in zip ties. You have 45 seconds. What do you do? Donovan made his call. He radioed the PRU coordinates to the extraction team and confirmed the prisoner for transfer. He did it the way men make choices in the field when every option has a cost they will be paying for years afterward, quickly, without looking away, and without pretending it was clean. Tan was transferred at the extraction point without ceremony. The PRU handler who received him did not ask questions, neither did Donovan. The protocol moved forward the way protocols do, without requiring the agreement of the people inside it. The promise he had made, all 4 men coming home, held. He had kept it. The other thing he had done that night would take considerably longer to examine. The extraction did not go clean. The 3 unaccounted VC fighters that Donovan had flagged in the darkness around the compound had tracked the element's movement toward the canal and called it in on a field radio to a support position 400 meters to the northwest. By the time the 4 Americans reached the extraction point, a canal junction marked by a single infrared strobe visible only through night vision equipment, the support position had already moved 2 elements to cut off the water approach. The extraction boat was 90 seconds out. The VC elements were closing from 2 directions. Donovan had 1 wounded man, 1 prisoner, and a stretch of open canal bank that offered no cover worth the name. He called the reaction force. The radio request for fire support was the operational equivalent of announcing their position to everyone within a kilometer, which was precisely the tactical problem with calling fire support in the Delta at 0300. It resolved the immediate problem by creating a larger one. But the math had shifted. The choice was no longer between clean and complicated. It was between complicated and catastrophic. The response came in the form of a pair of Navy Seawolves, HAL-3 gunship helicopters that were the Delta's version of close air support, smaller and faster and lower than anything the VC could reliably track in darkness. The Seawolves came in hot from the southeast, their miniguns opening before Donovan had finished the coordinate transmission, and the canal bank to the northwest lit up in a way that was not tactical so much as decisive. The VC support elements broke contact. The two closing squads pulled back into the tree line. The extraction boat arrived. In the chaos of boarding, Whiting first, then the prisoner, then Reyes and Lowe, Donovan last, the element took no additional casualties. The boat was moving before the last man was fully aboard. The Delta receded behind them, and the canal became a grey line in the darkness, and the Seawolves made one more pass over the tree line and then banked north, and the night came back down around them like a curtain. It was Lowe who said it first, sitting in the bow of the extraction boat, with his hand still on Whiting's arm, watching the tree line shrink behind them. "That's it," he said. "We're out." Donovan did not respond immediately. He was watching the canal behind them, watching the darkness where the compound was, watching the water that had tried to tell him something for 22 minutes and had been correct about everything. There was a phrase he had been assembling in his head since Hell Week at Coronado, since the first time an instructor dragged him from the surf and asked him why he hadn't quit yet. He had never been able to finish it until this moment, sitting in the stern of an extraction boat at 03:30 in the Mekong Delta, with canal water in his boots and a waterproof photograph pressed against his sternum, and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes not from effort, but from moral weight. It wasn't about firepower. It wasn't about superior training or helicopter gunships or the organizational capacity of the United States military to project violence into a rice paddy at any hour of the night. It was about something smaller and more durable than any of that. The refusal to quit when quitting was the only logical choice, and the knowledge that the refusal cost something that no after-action report would ever be required to measure. Across the Delta, in the network of canals and safe houses and village contacts that made up what remained of the Kien Hoa VCI structure that night, Nguyen Van Than's absence was already being processed. Couriers had been rerouted within the hour. Safe houses had been flagged. The two most sensitive canal routes in the network had been suspended pending assessment. The VCI had built redundancy into its structure precisely because it had always understood that individuals were temporary. The network would absorb the loss of one logistics coordinator, the way the canal absorbed everything else, completely, without ceremony and without stopping. The guerrilla movement that Than had served would continue. The supply networks would be rebuilt. The cells he had supplied would find other sources. That was the nature of the thing the Phoenix program was fighting. Not a hierarchy that could be decapitated, but a system with the specific resilience of something that had decided it was not going to stop. Tactical success that night was real. Strategic resolution was not. The extraction team reached the forward operating base at 04:17. The mission debrief lasted 40 minutes. The prisoner had already been transferred. The forms were complete. The operation was marked successful. 3 SEAL team, 2 operators from a simultaneous operation 4 kilometers south had not made it back. Their names were recorded. Their families would receive notifications. They would not appear in most histories of the Delta campaign because most histories of the Delta campaign were classified, and because the men who knew their names were the kind of men who carried those names quietly and for a long time. The stakes that morning, the real stakes, the ones that the intelligence package had never addressed, were resolved not by tactics, but by the accumulation of individual decisions made in darkness by men who understood that the math of what they were doing was not going to balance on any ledger anyone would ever be permitted to read. Victory came, but the cost was still being counted. The final count from that night's operations in Kien Hoa Province was recorded in the after-action report with the precision that bureaucratic necessity demands and human reality resists. SEAL Team 2, Detachment Delta. 1 prisoner secured, 9 enemy combatants neutralized, 1 friendly wounded, non-critical. Concurrent operation 4 kilometers south. Petty Officer 2nd Class Aaron Briggs, 23, from Columbus, Ohio, who had a mother who worked nights at a hospital and a brother still in high school. Engineman 1st Class David Park, 29, from Seattle, Washington, who had been accepted to the University of Washington before he enlisted and had kept the acceptance letter in his footlocker for 2 years, like a ticket he intended to use. 2 men. The after-action report gave them the same weight as the operational parameters because the form required it and because the men who wrote it had no other tool available. On the other side of the accounting, though no American after-action report would record it, the Kien Hoa VCI structure absorbed its losses from that night with the specific efficiency of an organization that had been absorbing losses for a decade. 2 couriers killed in the Seawolf strike. 1 guard at the Rach Giang position, Trin, 19, from a village near the Cambodian border, confirmed dead. Nguyen Van Than, transferred to PRU custody, disappeared from the VCI record that morning. His wife Lynn would not receive official notification. She would wait. She would keep teaching. She would not know for 4 years what had happened to the man who wrote to his sons about thinking of them every moment. The canal at Rach Giang at 0500 looked the way the Delta always looks after a night of contact, indistinguishable from itself. The water moved. The jungle breathed on both sides. Something floated 20 meters upstream that none of the provincial troops securing the compound chose to examine closely. The frogs had come back. They made the specific, uninterrupted sound of a landscape that has survived another night and does not consider this remarkable because it has survived 10,000 of them. Donovan spent the morning of the debrief in the manner of men who have held themselves together through action and must now manage the stillness that follows. He cleaned his weapons with the methodical attention that hands perform when the mind is elsewhere. He ate without tasting. He wrote in the small notebook he kept in his kit, not a journal, just operational notes, the kind that remained useful. And then he stopped writing and sat for a time looking at the photograph, his sister grinning at the camera in the spring light of a Virginia afternoon, while her brother, sealed behind plastic 6,000 miles away, tried to remember what that kind of light felt like. The waterproof photograph had survived the canal intact. Its corners had begun to soften from 8 months of the Delta's humidity and heat. The image was still clear. He pressed it flat again and put it back. What had died inside Donovan that night was not simple to name. It was not innocence. He had left that somewhere in the earlier months of his tour. It was something more specific, the belief that doing the right thing and following the protocol would always feel like the same decision. He had transferred a prisoner to handlers whose methods he was not required to witness, in accordance with a program whose results he was not permitted to question, in service of objectives whose strategic soundness he was beginning to doubt. He had done all of it correctly. Every form was signed. The 3 VC fighters who had escaped into the tree line during the Seawolf strike were never accounted for. The supply network Than had managed was disrupted for approximately 6 weeks before the VCI rebuilt the courier routes through alternate canal approaches. The intelligence extracted from Than by the PRU handlers, whatever it was, however it was obtained, was processed through channels that Donovan was never briefed on and never asked about. The promise he had made in the canal, all 4 men coming home, had held. James Whiting was in surgery by 0700 for the arm, which would heal completely. Carlos Reyes had not been hit. Patrick Lowe had not been hit. Michael Donovan had not been hit. The photograph of his sister was still there, damp, intact. He would carry it home. He would carry the other things home too. They didn't all fit in his breast pocket, but they made the trip. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to years. And the weight never got lighter. It only became more familiar. 23 years later, Michael Donovan attended a small reunion of SEAL Team 2 veterans at a bar in Virginia Beach on a Friday night in October of 1992. James Whiting came. His arm had healed fully. He had done 2 more tours, left the Navy in '73, and now ran a construction business outside of Baton Rouge. The arm was stronger than the original, he said, which was almost certainly not medically accurate, but sounded right. Carlos Reyes came. He ran a landscaping business in San Antonio, had 3 kids, and had the specific quality of a man who had made peace with the particular silence he carried, not by resolving it, but by building a life large enough to contain it. Patrick Lowe had become a physician. He worked emergency medicine in Dayton. He told Donovan, who had not known this, that he had named his youngest son after Dennis Farrell. Donovan had stayed in government contracting. He had been back to Southeast Asia twice, on different kinds of work. He had never gone back to Kien Hoa Province specifically. He was not sure what he would do if he did. In 1993, a partial Vietnamese government history of the Phoenix program's impact on the VCI in the Mekong Delta was published in Hanoi and translated by a graduate student at Berkeley who forwarded a copy to a researcher at the Naval War College. Nguyen Van Than was listed in the document as a logistics coordinator who had been detained and processed in July of 1969. He had been 31 years old. The document listed his wife's name, Lynn, and noted that she had continued teaching primary school in the province until her death in 2003. It noted that his sons, Min and Kwok, had survived the war. It did not describe the circumstances of their father's detention in any detail. Michael Donovan served honorably. He executed his mission under impossible conditions with the skill and discipline that 2 years of the hardest training the Navy could design had built into him. The 3 men behind him in the canal came home. He held the line that the protocol drew in darkness under fire with no one watching, and then he carried the weight of having held it for the rest of his life. That is what service in the Delta asked of the men who went there. And they delivered it without hesitation, and without recognition, and without the strategic outcome that their courage deserved. The fault, when there was fault, did not lie in the canal at Rach Giang. It lay in the strategic ambiguity that sent 4 men into black water without achievable endgame objectives. In the intelligence failures that were systemic and predictable. In the program architecture that required operators to make moral decisions that policymakers had outsourced to the men at the edge of the mission. The soldiers did their part. The question of whether the leaders did theirs is not resolved by the skill with which the soldiers fought. Nguyen Van Tan was 31 years old. He had a wife who taught children. He had 2 sons he wrote letters to every night the war allowed. He served the cause he had chosen at age 13 with discipline and competence and without cruelty. He deserves to be in this story. His courage does not diminish Donovan's. Both things are true. Both things should be remembered. The photograph of Donovan's sister, softened at the corners, the image still clear after all these years, sits in a frame on a shelf in Norfolk. She is still grinning at the camera. She still doesn't know exactly what her brother did that night, or what it cost him, or what it cost the man on the other side of the mission. Some things are carried privately. That is not the same as not being carried. The water remembers everything. Whether we are willing to look at what the water holds, that is the work that outlasts all of us. If you served or knew someone who served, their sacrifice was real. Their courage was real. Subscribe and join those who refuse to forget. Share this story if you believe these experiences deserve to survive. And remember, honor the warriors, question the wars.